I think we're going to hear today about the ways in which creativity is vital to our understanding of how the world works. It invites and encourages us to think laterally, to communicate and express ourselves, and these are all vital and core skills to any vocation, creative or otherwise. However, in my life and in writing the quarterly essay about safe schools last year, what I've learned is that young people being creative is contingent on those young people feeling safe in their learning environment. And the one thing that's a huge impediment to being creative in the first instance is fear. And we've still got a long way to go in ensuring that all Australian kids and teenagers feel safe in their learning environments. And when they do feel safe, it can be transformative. One place that shows me an example of this again and again is the Sydney Story Factory. It's an award-winning, not-for-profit creative writing centre for kids and teenagers in Redfern, which is about to open a second location in Parramatta. Full disclosure, I volunteer for Sydney Story Factory and I now sit on its board. You should check it out. Story Factory welcomes kids and teenagers of any background, but 25% of its students are Indigenous and 39% are from language backgrounds that are not English. These demographics are important because statistically, those young people are placed at a disadvantage compared to their peers, especially when it comes to literacy. And when you're not confident with literacy, that's potentially dangerous later in life. So many of these students come into the Story Factory not wanting to be there at all. But after getting one-on-one attention with tutors who encourage them to be silly and passionate, true to their interests, creative, in other words, they often become the first students who want to share their work with the rest of the room. Before our workshops, 56% of Indigenous students, for instance, said they really enjoyed writing, only 56%. And after the workshops, that figure leaps to 93%. What is that difference? It's a sense of safety that makes them want to be creative. And it's that creativity that makes them want to learn. See, education. It's not just for nerdy Asians.
Thank you, Ben. And you may have noticed our Auslan interpreters have been morphing in and out. There's Bettina, but you round of applause for David McQuiggan that was there earlier. He'll be back. Lucy Clark is a journalist and senior editor at The Guardian Australia. She's the author of Beautiful Failures: How the Quest for Success is Harming Our Kids, a book that challenges accepted wisdoms about schooling. Through personal experiences and journalistic investigation, Lucy calls on parents to re-evaluate childhood by examining their own expectations and questioning the purpose of education. Thank you, Lucy.
Thanks very much. I want to tell you a personal story about my daughter who, about halfway through her high school experience, started shutting down. It was a fear of a different order. She was made anxious by the constant assessment, the rigid expectations of a school system that demands conformity, compliance, and she shut down to the point where basically she failed everything that was expected of her in her school journey. And her anxiety ensured that the outcomes that we all focus on so doggedly, the ones that we say we need to succeed, were completely obliterated. She couldn't bear the idea of competition in education. She couldn't understand the concept of comparing and ranking individuals to achieve that magic number at the end of 12 years of schooling, and her anxiety was crippling. As a mother, I started asking questions about what was going wrong for my daughter in school, and as a journalist, I started asking much bigger questions about what this pressure is for, where it comes from, and is there a better way we can do this for our children and our future? When I did that, I went from a world where only my child mattered and into a world where every child matters. So what does all of this have to do with creativity? On so many levels, there is a lack of creativity and imagination in education systems, and on a meta level, there's an incredible lack of creativity and imagination in thinking about education and systems, and it's doing damage and it's damaging our kids, and that means it's damaging society ultimately. The education system that we churn our kids through was designed in the mid-19th century for the Industrial Revolution, and its perpetuation is one of the great human stories of doggedness and adherence to an idea in the face of all evidence to the contrary. This is a system that demands conformity, compliance, rule following, and features high stakes, high pressure, standardised testing. And these are the things that are the very antithesis to creativity, not to mention the joy of learning. And for the majority of kids, school has become a box-ticking exercise. We have professional teachers who should be trusted to teach in the way that they see fit, and yet they are pressured to teach to the test. Kids learn what's going to be on the test or try to second guess what's going to be on the test. They regurgitate for the test, and then they immediately forget what was on the test. And all of this in the name of achieving a number at the end of what has become akin to a race from A to B. Now, research shows that kids are disengaging from school more than ever before. It also shows that mental health issues are greater than ever before. There is so much anxiety in the community. There is so much anxiety in our kids about performance and achievement, all through a very narrow lens of what we regard success to be. Kids now specifically report that their anxiety is connected to school pressure, and so we can no longer refrain from connecting the two. By the year 2050, the World Health Organization predicts that depression is going to be the largest global health issue. And I don't think it's a coincidence that our mental health crisis is on the rise at the same time that we have been diminishing and sidelining the arts and creativity in education. We need a revolution in education, but change is incredibly slow. We're all products of the same system. Everyone in this room, we've all been through it, and it has brilliantly prepared us to keep going unquestioningly down this blind alley. We actually need to put a bomb underneath this system and start again. It is amazing whenever we have these discussions how people talk about their own experience from decades ago, sometimes 50 years ago, and this nostalgia is no longer instructive for what we need to do to move into the future. It was great back then, but the world has changed. It has been absolutely transformed, and we need to start thinking in new ways. We need to stop talking about what it used to be like and start creatively imagining completely new way for the future. Humanity has a very large stake in this happening very soon. We are heading into an uncertain future, and we desperately need creative thinkers who can react imaginatively and with agility to unforeseen challenges of the future. The robots are coming. We know that. They're already here. We do not need a system that churns out more robots. This is the time for us to move into our most human traits: compassion, creativity.
Thank you, Lucy. So let's open this up. I have to say, I went to a strange, interesting French primary school here in Australia to do my primary, all in French. Then went to a selective girls' high school, then had free education and did a Bachelor of Arts that I didn't finish, Mum, I know, at senior uni. But it wasn't until I went to an acting school with my delusion of wanting to be an actress, and I became more of a presenter than an actress. At the Victorian College of the Arts, I was shocked to find out in the first few months that people just didn't learn by reading. I thought being a great actress was about intelligence, and I was shocked to find there's other men and women in my class who had greater intuition than me, greater instinct than me, that made much more open actors and performers than I did. People learnt orally, visually, by doing. It was a revelation, and I was 24 by the time I understood this, and I thought, that might have been helpful earlier on. So you say put a bomb under it. We were saying that too in the dressing room. How can that even happen? Where does that even begin? That notion, I wonder, from anyone?
Well, top down, bottom up. It's got to be an open community discussion. Everyone has a stake in this. I think we need to listen to kids a lot more. We don't, teachers, of course.
Oh, yes, please.
Yes, thanks. Applause.
Yes, young man.
We don't trust kids to know what's right for them. And, when they're approaching 15, 16, they need a sense of agency. And if they're in an education system that just does stuff to them and they have to follow rules, they're going to feel very disengaged. And the figures back that up. Robin?
Could I add that we need to trust teachers a lot more?
Yeah, of course.
Yes.
Teachers are so often left out of the conversation about education. We're often, some of the Scandinavian countries are often held up to us around education. They actually do celebrate their teachers, and their teachers have high status. Teachers need to be given back their status as a profession, and we need to consult them. Teachers know that every child is different. They have a whole repertoire of different strategies and understandings. And the relationship between a teacher and a student is so important. And yet we've allowed governments, policymakers, bureaucrats to make the decisions far more than consulting teachers. And teachers being able to be part of those think tanks and those committees of inquiry and everything. If you look, you'll see that often teachers are the last people to be asked. So alongside teachers...
Kids are last.
Kids, kids too, yeah. I think they're often on a... There's equity, they're on an equal standing there, but yes, I agree the kids need to be asked, but teachers do as well.
I mean, it makes me think that this isn't a conversation that Australia is having in isolation, right? This is something that that education systems and communities are talking about around the world. I wonder if there are any great templates overseas where you've seen, wow, that really works, or that's a good model. Like you mentioned Scandinavian countries before. Should we be looking at abroad, and what are those examples?
Well, I think some of those Scandinavian countries have some lessons for us, but I think we also, for years, our education system was held up, and teachers went to New York and to England and to all kinds of other countries because I think it's really over my generation as a teacher that there has been that loss. I think there is a lot of research that we could look to, but I think we have to stop looking to the United States of America and the UK.
Yeah.
Why do we have this colonial cringe here? I think we have, some of the very best educators who could work with parents and children and the community more broadly. There are also some fantastic community arts organisations like Sydney Story Factory, but also like Sydney Theatre Company and Westwards that I'm currently involved in, who do know, how to work with children and teachers, and to give children the agency and the empowerment, and also to talk with parents, I think, because parents are hearing the media speak and the politicians speak, and parents want the very best for their children, but they're being told it's how well children do in their NAPLAN, and so NAPLAN practice tests have become the highest selling books in bookstores because parents want the best and they've been told they've got to do well. So there's a whole lot of things that need to happen at once, I think.
There are some great examples in Australia as well. I mean, I've found in the research of my book there are some schools here that we don't need to look overseas, where there have been principals who have actually put a bomb under the system and reconfigured and reimagined their school and discovered that actually they have more autonomy than they thought they had as imposed by the system. So there's a lot of bravery and courage involved in that, and understanding that you probably have a bit more freedom than you might otherwise think.
Megan, your baby's tiny, and in 20 years, when he's finished his education, I'm wondering what primary school will be like by the time he gets there. Will high school have changed? Have you got a vision already how you want it to go?
Well, I know that in order to change, the culture of, I don't know, like the country, you have to begin with your own, like the culture of your own family. And I know that having had a child, like my husband and I, we talked very seriously about what we would like to prioritize, culturally in our family. And I think that, having a boy now is a very, it's a big thing to have a son at the moment, given the conversation that's going on. And I don't know how to say this in an articulate way, so I'm just going to say it like I'm me, which I am, which is that, like, as a country, like, we are so obsessed with sports, and the idea of, masculinity is so competitive, and there's a lot of threads of, competition and sports, and that sort of very, like, masculine energy that for me is, I went to a private all-girls school where I did really, really terribly. I got expelled in year 10, and then I went to a performing arts school where the arts culturally were celebrated, and suddenly I went from being a drama nerd to being, like, so cool. And it really changed the way that I saw myself. So I would like to try to foster a culture in our family of, making the arts important, and not allowing this sort of, very parochial Australian man football, sports, beer thing to be prominent for us. Like, that's kind of what I'm really thinking about.
I think if we put the arts back into education, we'd be doing something really important. And again, over my career, in working with pre-service teachers, the arts has been cut and cut and cut. And so lots of teachers don't feel confident in, arts processes and experiences. They bring some baggage from their own time being the tree at the back of the stage, or being told they were tone deaf and couldn't sing or whatever. We need to give teachers those opportunities to rediscover their own arts and creativities, and put the arts back at the centre. And actually the research shows that. The research shows that you change, just as you said, Megan. You get a sense of who you are, and it's not about being the next, Megan Washington or Kate Blanchett or Brett Whiteley. It's the actual processes that give us back, allow us to discover all of the different possibilities and what we can do and what we can change.
I want to start a drama school, called Send Your Children Here If You Don't Want Them to Be Famous. Because I think it's the games that you learn, it's the stuff that you do in class, it's the clearing the table and the chairs, it's the body awareness, being close to bodies and touching them and not freaking out, giving permission to be in the room together, stuff that you do learn at acting school, I have to say, which is, and you get to spend 3 years together, which has a bit of a school feeling, and you literally see people change, morph, for good and for bad, and you learn from the good and the bad. You learn that you can't push people too far, and you're there to help them. You know how to become supportive.
But it strikes me that we need to kind of broaden the conversation in terms of how we see arts within Australian society more generally, because I think, so often we think of the arts as simply entertainment or a luxurious addition to the repertoire of our lives. I think, sport is arguably justifiably seen as something that, promotes health, as something that promotes community. The arts do exactly the same thing. The arts are really important for soul health and mental health in those sorts of ways. And depending on who's in power at the time, you do really see this ideological push away from the arts, a deprioritising of the arts. Whereas I actually think, in our everyday lives, the arts are so central to us, but we just don't think of our culture that way. Like in Australia, what's the most treasured and, most famous man-made structure? It's a house of the arts. More of us go to art galleries every year than sporting events. And that's not a narrative that's really spoken about, how much we actually do already engage with the arts versus our perception of arts within our culture.
Lucy,
And
can
all-
you go next? I'm
and
just going to
all
say,
of these- sorry.
if you've got a question, if you think and perhaps you might want to hold your microphone back at the same time. That's good. Catch it. If you'd like to ask a question, if you'd like to make your way down, there'll be some microphones brought down just while we keep talking. Bring up the lights a little bit so people don't trip over. Occupational health and safety. One microphone here and one microphone here, because seriously, we'll probably only have time for 2 questions on each side. If you've got a burning
bold.
question, here, for, against, tweeting, all of that, good. Lucy?
All of the arts and artistic pursuits in our lives gives us a sense of who we are as individuals. And as kids grow up, particularly through the school system, there is nothing more important than a strong sense of self. It is vastly more important than a really good ATAR taking them into their own future.
Great. Down here, look at this. Down to the front. I love it. Look at David just signing away. I love it. Yes, question from the floor, sir.
Hi, I'm an English teacher out in Western Sydney, the deep west as I like to call it, in a school that is connected to trade training centre, where vocational training is really emphasised, and most of our year 10s don't go on to seek an ATAR. As a result, anything that isn't purposeful, so anything creative, they don't see a point to it. How would you sell to a kid who's already made up their mind that drama and reading has nothing to do with their life? How would you sell that to them?
Good question.
A bit late. I think it's a bit late by year 10. I think it needs, we need to prioritise those reading,
Is
literature.
it too late by year 10 to
Well,
become creative?
No, sorry. I mean, there needs to be that
Beforehand,
prioritisation
yes.
all the way through, so that it is part of their lives naturally by that age.
But I think if those experiences are embedded in the other pursuits that they're doing at school, they will soon see a difference. Westwards has a brilliant story to tell about some of the boys at Granville Boys High who were feeling that way, and they brought authors in and they encouraged them to tell their stories, to build their confidence in telling their stories. And a lot of those boys are now the school leaders just a couple of years later. It can make a huge difference. It's made a huge difference for adults who have been enculturated in that way, to have those experiences. But it's about not doing them separately. It's about embedding them richly in what's happening.
Thank you. Next question. Come on down.
Hi, Julia. Thanks for that.
Oh, g'day, my pleasure.
Also, thanks also to the panel for insightful discussion. I'm actually aspiring secondary education art teacher.
Right.
I'm aspiring to teach mathematics and, at the risk of a backlash, religious education.
No judgment here. No judgment here.
Yeah, thank you. The question I have to the panel in general and to yourself, Benjamin, with the implementation of the Safe Schools program and how it's set to encourage creativity, what then is the future of scripture classes, and would you say that scripture classes, scripture programs rather, tend to stifle creativity?
I'm not sure if it's like a direct correlation, that's strongly a direct correlation, but I do know that at my school, scripture was taught in 2 separate ways. There were religion classes and there were scripture classes. So because we were a religious school, obviously we were taught about the Christian faith, but I also really valued, one, how much I learnt about that, because I think that's kind of important for my biblical literacy, like the way that I now argue with Lyle Shelton is really important. That background has been imperative in order to engage with those conversations. At the same time, there's been this kind of false dichotomy presented that if you're a religious school, you also can't nurture and protect your LGBTIQ and questioning students, which is completely wrong. One of the largest networks of Catholic schools in Australia, for instance, has adopted what is essentially Safe Schools training for all their teachers and have made it mandatory nationwide, because the teachers there, and again it always comes back to the teachers being the silent heroes in all of this, the teachers at those schools knew that they encountered gender diverse and sexually diverse students, and they wanted to be equipped to support them. I mean, the other thing about Safe Schools is that it's been presented as this program where people come in and teach kids things, and that's absolutely false. It's to equip teachers to know how to support students. And that's something that every school, religious or not, should be behind, because we know about the dropout rates of LGBTIQ teenagers, we know about the truancy rates of LGBTIQ teenagers, and we know about the bullying rates. That's why Safe Schools was established in the first place, with bipartisan support, as a completely non-controversial initiative. And in fact, you see some of the religious schools being some of the most hardest advocate for that kind of teacher resource training. So they don't need to be separate.
Smartphones know more than kids sitting tests. So this is an excellent opportunity to think, okay, they can get all of that information from there. How can they be more human and learn things that can't necessarily be answered by the little rectangular thing in their pocket?
And it's not just the content knowledge that kids need. They need the opportunity to explore the different ways to learn, and also to be critical about the content. It's not necessarily right. They need to be encouraged to ask questions, and that's really important. So while technologies are important, and they're going to continue, I know, it's the relationships. Over and over again, we're shown it's the relationships between the teacher and the learner individually that are so important. And I don't think that robots will be able to replicate that.
So it's the human relationship, technically.
Yes, well, it's a bit of both. So much to touch on, such a big discussion. Oh, and look at the lovely people still standing at microphone number 4 in the vain hope. I'm afraid I can't, my darlings. Come and find us in the foyer after. I know. Twitter. There'll be more of these conversations, but of course this Mark Colvin conversation hopefully will happen again next year, but this is obviously something we'll be talking about all afternoon, every day, all the time, keeping on going. We're going to finish up now with another song from Megan. I want to thank our extraordinary panel here today with us, Robin Ewing, Lucy Clark and Benjamin Law. Thank you. Thank you. After Megan's song, I'm just going to give you a little bit more housekeeping, but first let's listen to the things that Mark Colvin always loved, which is extraordinary people with extraordinary voices. Thanking you, Megan.
This is a song, as I said, it was hard to find a song that wasn't about mean boys. This is a song about my sister and I when we were children. First of all, I was surprised how you looked into the mirror. I could see the Holy Spirit there. You saw dance in bed. You were young and I was younger. I did everything you said. Oh, I remember my big sister. I was 5 and she was 10. Taught me most of what I know, how to swim and play piano. I remember how you held my hand the first time I heard Graceland. Never had to learn my numbers, never had to learn to share. On the floor and in the garden, Judy Garland, Fred Astaire. And you could be easily me, and I could be easily you. And I know I would be proud to say it if it were true. And all the things that I've said and things that I've done to you. You were young and she was 10, I was 5, and she was 10. 10, sorry.
You! Love her, love her! Love her! Yes! Love her! So good! So good. Thank you so much for coming to the inaugural Mark Colvin Conversation. What a brilliant way to start a rainy Sunday. We're excited to announce too that Kidney Health Australia, the peak body for kidney health, is launching the Mark Colvin Research Foundation with a goal to find a cure. Mark, of course, was a leading kidney health advocate after his own journey with the disease, and the legacy of work achieved by Mark in raising awareness for kidney health continues. Vivid Ideas is proud to support this new fund, and we encourage you to talk to Dr. Lisa Murphy, Interim CEO of Kidney Health Australia, who will be in the foyer to answer any questions you may have. Kidney Health Australia has also partnered with the Australian Broadcasting Corporation, which is the ABC in smaller terms, in creating the Mark Colvin Scholarship, a professional development opportunity for those who might still have a passion for journalism, for real journalism. Your entries close on the 13th of July. Look it up. You can find out more at kidney.org.au. Make sure you experience more of Vivid Sydney, which is on until the 16th of June. If you want there are more talks happening right in this very room in an hour or so. Dan Goods from NASA, after my stargazing experience, I highly recommend it, will explore the interplay between creativity and science. And Jane McGonigal will be taking you on a crash course in future thinking. Please find a Vivid Ideas and music brochure in the foyer. Geez, it's been lovely having you coming in on a wet Sunday for this incredible human, Mark Colvin. And creativity, let it continue, let it go on. Thank you very much. Have a great Sunday. And thank you, panel. And thank you, David.